You know, some things just don't leave you, no matter how many years pass. That day, the day my son raised his hand on me, it's still fresh in my mind. He didn't hit me hard. No, not really. But the pain wasn't in the slap. It was in his eyes. The way he looked at me like I was a burden, like I didn't belong in his house anymore. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning. I had made pancakes for my grandchildren. They loved them with maple syrup. I could still hear their laughter upstairs. Then my daughter-in-law came in. She didn't even say good morning. She looked straight at me and said, "You can't stay here anymore." I thought she was joking. I smiled and said, "Oh, don't be silly. Where would I go?" She didn't smile back. She just said, "This is our house now. Daniel says it's time." My heart stopped for a moment. Daniel? My son, the same boy who used to cry if I left the room when he was little? I called him from the hallway. "Daniel, what is she saying?" He came down slowly, eyes on the floor, couldn't even look at me. He said, "Mom, we talked about this. You need to move out. You're not well enough to live alone, and it's hard for us too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, "I'm not asking you for money, Daniel. I cook, I clean, I take care of your children. What did I do wrong?" He didn't answer. He just said, "Mom, please don't make this harder." And that's when she stepped closer and said it straight. "You can go to a nursing home. We already found one. They'll take good care of you." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. A nursing home? I built this house with my husband. Every wall in this place has our memories. We raised Daniel here. He took his first steps right in this kitchen. I spent my whole life making this place a home, and now I was being told to leave it behind, like I was just some old furniture that didn't fit anymore. I told her, "This is my house. Your husband grew up here." She said, "Not anymore," and she held out her hand. "Give me the keys." I felt something break inside me. I looked at Daniel. My voice shook when I said, "You're really letting her do this?" He didn't say a word. He just stood there, with that helpless face. That silence hurt more than anything. I wanted to scream, to tell him how many nights I stayed awake when he was sick, how many times I skipped meals so he could eat more. But the words got stuck in my throat. I went to my room and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the picture on the wall. Me, Daniel, and Robert, my husband. That picture was taken on Daniel's 10th birthday. Robert had built him a little wooden train that day. Daniel smiled so big. I could still see that smile, but now it was gone. I sat there for hours, crying quietly. I didn't want them to hear me. I didn't want my grandkids to see their grandma like that. When the sun went down, I could hear them laughing in the living room, watching TV, like nothing had happened. That night, I packed a small bag. Not because I wanted to go, but because I didn't want to give them a reason to throw me out like trash. I took a few clothes, some old letters, and Robert's watch. That watch still ticks, even after all these years. I don't know why, but I held it close to my chest and whispered, "Robert, I can't do this alone." When morning came, I made breakfast for everyone one last time. No one talked to me, not even Daniel. He took the kids to school, and she sat there scrolling through her phone like I wasn't even in the room. When I finished washing the dishes, I looked around the kitchen one last time. The curtains I sewed myself, the little crack on the wall Robert used to say he'd fix, the smell of coffee that never really left this. Then I took my bag and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't want to hear their silence again. I just walked down the street, slowly, holding on to that watch. Every step I took away from that house felt like I was leaving pieces of my life behind. When I reached the bus stop, I sat on the bench and looked at the sky. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. And then, right when I was about to cry again, a man in a gray coat stopped in front of me. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. He said soft, "Mrs. Carter? You probably don't remember me, but I worked with your husband. I think I have something that belongs to you." I stared at him confused. "Something that belongs to me?" He nodded. "Yes, something your husband left behind for you." I didn't know what he was talking about, but the way he said it, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't completely forgotten me. For a moment, I just looked at him. My mind couldn't keep up with what he was saying. He looked older too, gray hair, a kind face, eyes that carried the same tiredness I saw every morning in the mirror. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "but I don't remember you." He smiled a little. "That's all right. It's been over 30 years. I was one of the engineers at the factory where Robert worked. We all knew him. He used to talk about you all the time." Hearing Robert's name after so long, it hit me right in the chest. I felt my throat tighten. "Robert," I whispered, "you knew my husband?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, gently sitting beside me. "Robert was a good man, and before he passed, he left me something to give. He said if anything ever happened to him, and I couldn't reach you then, I should hold on to it until the time felt right." I didn't understand. "What do you mean by the right time?" He shrugged. He didn't explain, just said I'd know. "And when I saw you sitting here today all alone, I don't know, something told me it's time." He reached into his old coat pocket and pulled out a small, brown envelope. The edges were worn, like it had been waiting for years. My hands trembled when he placed it in my lap. "For you, Mrs. Carter," he said. "From Robert." I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, unable to move. I hadn't heard my husband's voice in more than 20 years, and suddenly it felt like he was speaking to me again, through this envelope, through this stranger. "Thank you," I finally said, but he was already standing up. He tipped his hat, gave me a small nod, and walked away before I could say another word. I sat there for a long time, clutching that envelope like it was my heart. The buses came and went, people hurried past, but I couldn't leave. When I finally gathered enough courage, I tore it open. Inside there was a small key, gold, a little rusty but still shining, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. Robert's handwriting, shaky but familiar. It said, "If you're reading this, my love, it means I couldn't tell you everything in time. You've always been stronger than you know. Go to the place where we built our first dream. You'll understand." That was it. No address, no explanation. Just that one line. I sat back on the bench, staring at the note. "The place where we built our first dream." I whispered the words over and over again, trying to remember. Was it our old house? The one we lost after his death? Or maybe the small cabin by the lake, where we used to go every summer before Daniel was born? I couldn't think straight. My eyes were burning from the tears I'd been holding in since morning. The only thing I knew was that this wasn't just some random note. Robert had never been a man of riddles. If he left me something, it meant something. I held the key tight in my hand and decided to go. I didn't even know if the cabin still existed, but I had nowhere else to be. No home, no family, nothing to lose. I got up and took the next bus heading north. The ride was long, and the wind outside was cold, the kind that seeps into your bones. As I sat by the window, the city slowly faded behind me. The gray buildings, the noise, the faces that never looked at, all of it disappeared into the distance. For the first time in years, I felt something strange, a sense of movement, of purpose. Maybe it was foolish, but a small voice inside me said, "Go, he's waiting for you there." When I reached the town, it was almost dark. The bus stopped near a small grocery store I remembered from years ago. It looked older now. Everything did, but the smell of the pine trees, the sound of the wind, it was all still there. I started walking down the old dirt road that led to the lake. Every step felt heavier. I remembered Robert's laugh, the way he used to carry the fishing rods, how Daniel used to chase fireflies near the cabin. I hadn't thought about those days in decades. And then I saw it. The cabin, old, broken, and covered in ivy, but still standing. My heart started pounding. The door was locked, but when I looked closely, there was a small metal box nailed under the porch, half hidden under dust. And when I tried the key Robert had left me, it fit perfect. The lock clicked open. Inside was another envelope and a note. It said, "Antonia, if you've come this far, you're ready to know the truth." I froze. The truth? About what? I looked around the empty cabin. The sun was almost gone, and everything was turning gray. I could hear the lake outside, calm, quiet, endless. For a second, I wanted to leave it all there, close the box, pretend I hadn't found it. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. My fingers were trembling so much I could barely hold the paper. The envelope was old, yellowed with time, and when I tore it open, a faint smell of smoke came out, the same scent that used to cling to Robert's shirts after his late nights in the workshop. Inside was a single letter. I sat down on the floor. My knees were too weak to keep standing, and I started reading. "My dearest Antonia, if you found this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you what really happened. You've probably been angry at me for a long time, and you have every right to be. But before you close this letter, please hear me out." I stopped there for a second. My heart felt like it was breaking all over again. I remembered the night he left. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a note on the kitchen table that said, "Don't look for me." For years, I hated him for that. I thought he abandoned me. I kept reading. That night when I left, it wasn't because I wanted to. I found out something at the fact, something dangerous. They were hiding what really caused the fire, the one that killed all those men. And when I tried to expose it, they came for me. I had to disappear, Antonia. It was the only way to keep you and Daniel safe. I froze. The fire. Of course I remembered it. The one everyone said was an accident. Robert had survived that day, but he was never the same again. I thought it was guilt, maybe trauma, but this was something else. They told me if I kept quiet, you and Daniel would be fine. But if I said a word, they'd make sure I'd lose everything. I couldn't risk it. I had to go into hiding. Every day I wanted to come home. Every single day. But I couldn't. Not when I knew they were watching. I covered my mouth to stop the sound that came out. Half a sob, half a scream. All those years I thought he'd betrayed us, when in truth, he was protecting. The next line was written in a darker ink, like he had pressed the pen too hard. "If anything ever happens to me, there's one man who knows the full truth. His name is Charles Whitmore. He was my supervisor, but he's not who you think he is. If you ever want closure, find him. Charles Whitmore. That name. I hadn't heard it in decades, but suddenly it came back like a shadow. The man who had given me the company check after Robert's disappearance. The one who said, "Sometimes people can't handle pressure." I remembered how cold his eyes were that day, how he didn't even look sorry. I turned the page over. At the bottom, Robert had written one last, "I love you, Antonia. Always have. And if they tell you I'm dead, don't believe them until you see proof with your own eyes." My hands went numb. The paper slipped from my fingers and fell to the dusty floor. I sat there, staring at the wall, unable to breathe. The wind outside howled through the cracks of the cabin, like someone whispering my name. And then I saw it, a small wooden box hidden behind the old stove, half covered in cobwebs. I don't know why, but I crawled over to it and pulled it out. It was locked, but the same golden key fit. When I opened it, there were photographs, black and white, edges burned, and one that made my heart stop. It was Robert, standing with two men I didn't recognize, and behind them, the same factory that had burned down. But what made me gasp wasn't that. It was the date written on the back of the photo, June 1994. Robert was supposed to be dead since 1993. My eyes blurred. I felt like the ground under me disappeared. Was he alive after all? Was he trying to reach me but couldn't? Or was someone else keeping him from coming back? I didn't know what to think anymore. All I knew was that I had to find Charles Whitmore, even if it was the last thing I ever did. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the old wooden floor, staring at Robert's letter until my eyes went dry. Every sound outside, the wind through the trees, the tapping of rain on the roof, felt like echoes of the past coming back for me. When morning came, I was still sitting there, the letter folded neatly beside me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose. Not revenge, not anger, just the need to know. I packed what little I had, a scarf, my wallet, and the photo of Robert standing in front of that fact. Then I left the cabin, locking it behind me like I was closing the door on half my life. The road to town was muddy and quiet. The birds had just started singing. I walked slowly, every step making my knees ache, but I didn't stop. I kept thinking about that name, Charles Whitmore. I didn't know where he lived. I didn't even know if he was still alive, but I remembered the town where the factory had been. Riverside. That's where everything started and where everything ended. So I bought a bus ticket. The driver looked at me, probably wondering what an old woman like me was doing traveling alone, but I didn't care. When I sat down by the window, I whispered to myself, "Robert, if you're still out there somewhere, I'm coming." The bus ride felt endless. Every time I closed my eyes, memories came rushing in. Robert laughing in the kitchen, Daniel playing with his toy cars, the smell of Sunday breakfast. All gone, all stolen from me. By the time I reached Riverside, the sun was high and the air smelled like rust and dust, the same smell that had always hung around that old factory. The town had changed, but not in a good way. Most of the shops were closed, paint peeling off the walls, windows broken. It looked forgotten like me. I stopped at a diner that was still open. A young waitress, barely in her 20s, came over with a smile. "What can I get you, ma'am?" "Just some coffee," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "And do you know anyone by the name of Charles Whitmore?" Her smile faded. She thought for a moment. "You mean old Mr. Whitmore? He used to live out near the industrial district, near the old mill. I think his place is still there, but what?" She hesitated. "They say he's not all there anymore. Doesn't talk much. Stays locked up. Some people think he's gone a little crazy." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Thank you," I said, standing up. I didn't finish the drink. My hands were shaking again, not from fear this time, but from something else. Anticipation, maybe even anger. When I reached the edge of town, I saw it. The mill. Broken windows, rusted pipes, walls blackened from years of neglect. And behind it, a small wooden house, barely standing. I walked up to the porch and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Finally, the door creaked open. An old man stood there, thin as a stick, his eyes pale and hollow. It took me a second to recognize him. The same cold eyes, the same sharp jaw. "Charles Whitmore." "Mr. Whitmore?" I said quietly. "Do you remember Robert Carter?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me for a long time, like he was trying to recognize a ghost. Then finally his lips moved. "You shouldn't have come here." His voice was rough, dry, almost a whisper. I took a step closer. "You owe me the truth. You owe him the truth." He turned away and walked inside, leaving the door open. A silent invitation or a warning, I couldn't tell. I hesitated only for a second before following him in. The house smelled of dust and old papers. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and factory blueprints. My eyes widened. Robert's name was on some of them. So was mine. "Why do you have these?" I asked. My voice was shaking. He sat down in an old armchair, breathing heavily. "Because I kept the proof," he said. "The company didn't just burn that factory, Antonia. They killed those men, and your husband tried to stop them." My knees almost gave out. You knew all this time." I tried to warn him, he said, looking down. But he wouldn't back off. He said people deserved to know. They wanted to make an example of him. So I did what I could. I helped him disappear. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at him, tears blurring everything. Then why didn't he come back? I whispered. If you helped him, why didn't he come home? Whitmore looked up, and for a second, I saw real guilt in his eye. Because he didn't make it, Antonia. They found him before he could reach you. I shook my head. No, you're lying. I have a photo. It's dated after his death. He was alive. The old man stared at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Show me." I pulled the photo from my bag, my hands trembling. He took one look at it, and his face went pale. "This wasn't Robert," he whispered. This was the man they sent to replace him. I froze. For a moment, everything around me went silent. The ticking clock, the creaking floor, even my own breath. "What do you mean, not Robert?" I whispered. Whitmore held the photo closer, his hands trembling. "This man, his name was Samuel. He was one of ours. The company used him for replacements. They faked deaths, swapped faces, made people disappear." My heart started pounding so loud I could barely hear him. "You're saying my husband was replaced?" He nodded slowly. "For a while, yes, until things went wrong." I took a step back, shaking my head. No, I talked to him. I saw him. He came to me after the fire. He hugged me. My voice broke. Whitmore looked at me with sad, hollow eye. "That wasn't him, Antonia. Robert was already gone. They didn't want you to look for him, so they gave you someone to believe in." It felt like the ground beneath me gave way. All these years, the man I mourned, the face I remembered, it wasn't even real. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I just stood there, shaking, staring at that photo like it might suddenly start speaking. Whitmore leaned forward, his voice lower now. "They buried Robert's body near the old quarry behind the steel yard. But it wasn't just him. There were other men who tried to tell the truth." My chest tightened. You helped them do this?" He looked down, ashamed. "I tried to save who I could, but you can't fight a monster when you're inside it." I felt my knees go weak, so I held on to the edge of the table. For 75 years, I lived with guilt, thinking I'd failed. But the truth was, the world had failed both of us. I looked up at him, tears falling freely now. "I need to see him," I said. "I need to see where he is." Whitmore hesitated. "Antonia, that place, it's not safe. They still have people watching. If they know you're looking." "I've already lost everything," I said softly. "What more can they take?" He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "There's a map in my drawer. Take it, but once you go there, don't come back. And if anyone asks, you never found me." I reached for the map with trembling hands. As I turned to leave, I heard his voice one last time. "Antonia, Robert loved you. He never stopped." I didn't look back. Outside, the wind had picked up, and dark clouds gathered over the sky. It was going to rain, the same cold rain that had fallen the night he disappeared. I clutched the map against my chest and whispered, "I'm coming, Robert. This time, I won't lose you again." And then I walked into the storm. The rain had already soaked through my coat by the time I reached the edge of the old quarry. It looked exactly like I remembered: the jagged rocks, the smell of wet rust, the wind howling through broken fences. For 70 years, this place had been left to rot, like it carried a curse no one wanted to touch. My boots sank into the mud as I took one step after another. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: a grave, a sign, maybe a piece of the past that refused to stay buried. The map Whitmore gave me was damp, the ink bleeding, but I could still make out one thing. Behind the third steel post, 10 feet down, I stood in front of it. My heart started pounding again, but this time not from fear, from a strange, aching hope. Maybe I'd finally see him again. Maybe all those sleepless nights talking to a ghost would end. I fell to my knees in the dirt. My hands were trembling as I started digging with the small shovel I'd brought. The ground was hard, wet, and cold, but I didn't stop. Each handful of dirt felt like pulling pieces of my own life out of the ground. After a while, my fingers hit something solid, a piece of wood. My breath caught. I cleared the mud away, and there it was, a small wooden box, old and half-rotted. Not a coffin, just a box. I stared at it for a long moment before finally pulling it free. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. When I opened it, it wasn't what I expected. No bone, no body, just a folded piece of cloth, and beneath it, a photograph. The photo was worn and faded, but I'd know that face anyway. Robert. He was sitting in a hospital bed, pale and weak but alive, and next to him, a woman I didn't recognize. She was holding his hand, smiling. I turned the photo over. On the back, in his handwriting, were just 5 words. "Forgive me." It was safer. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. All those years I thought he'd been taken from me, but he'd chosen to leave. I sat there in the mud and rain, staring at that photo until my tears blurred the ink. I whispered to the wind, "Why, Robert? You could have told me. You could have trusted me." And for a moment, I thought I heard him answer. Not in words, but in the way the rain fell softer, gentler, like an apology from the sky. Then I noticed something else in the box. A small envelope sealed tight, with my name on it. I tore it open. Inside was a letter, yellowed, smudged, but still readable. "My dearest Antonia, if you ever find this, it means they failed to keep it hidden. I didn't die that night. They took me, made me someone else. I agreed to it, because if I hadn't, they would have taken you too. I watched you from afar for years. I saw you light a candle every winter for me. I wanted to reach out so many times, but they were always there. I'm sorry, my love. I thought disappearing was the only way to keep you safe, but I never stopped being yours. Robert." By the time I finished reading, the paper had turned soft in my hands from the rain. I pressed it to my chest, whispering through my tears, "You fool, I would have chosen danger over silence." The storm had almost passed now. The wind slowed, and the gray clouds started to fade into pale blue. I sat there for a long time, an old woman clutching a letter, surrounded by the ghosts of her past. When I finally stood up, I looked at the horizon and said quietly, "You tried to protect me, Robert, but in doing so, you left me alone." Then I smiled faintly through the pain. "At least now I know the truth." I placed the box back into the earth, covering it gently. And as I walked away from that place, I didn't feel the same weight anymore. The guilt was gone. The questions had been answered. For the first time in decades, I could finally say goodbye. The road back home felt longer than it ever had before. Every turn, every tree, every flicker of a streetlight felt like a memory reaching out to touch me one last time. The rain had stopped, but everything around me was still wet. The ground, the air, even my soul. I kept that letter inside my coat, close to my heart. It felt warm there, even through the cold wind. For years, I had begged God to tell me why. Now I had my answer, and it hurt more than I thought it would. The car's headlights cut through the fog as I drove down the empty road. It was the same road I took the night Robert disappeared. I remember how young I was back then, still believing that love could fix anything. Now, 75 years later, I knew better. Love doesn't fix things. It just teaches you how to survive when they break. When I reached home, the house looked smaller somehow. Quiet, tired, like it had been waiting for me all this time. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for a second, I could almost hear his voice. That deep, gentle sound calling my name from the hallway. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm home, Robert." The air was still, but I could feel something there. Maybe it was just my heart refusing to let go. Or maybe he really was still here, somewhere in the quiet. I lit the same candle I'd been lighting every winter since he died. Only this time, it wasn't for mourning. It was for peace. The flame flickered softly, and I sat down beside it. My hands were wrinkled, trembling, the same hands that had built a life, then buried it, then dug it back up again. I took the photo from the box out of my pocket, the one of Robert in that hospital bed. I looked at it for a long time. He looked older, sadder, but alive. And even after everything, I could still see love in his eye. "I forgive you," I said quietly. The words came out shaky but real. They filled the room like a prayer. And just then, the light flickered. Once, twice, then stayed steady again. I smiled through my tears. Maybe it was the electricity, or maybe he heard me. I sat there until the candle burned low, thinking about how strange life. We spend decades chasing answers, and when we finally find them, they don't set us free, they just make us soft, gentler. When I finally stood up to go to bed, I looked around the room one last time. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I whispered into the stillness, "Good night, Robert. Rest now. I will too." Then I turned off the light. The house sighed with me, an old, tired sound, and for the first time in a lifetime, I felt peace. The night was silent, but it was a heavy silence, the kind that makes your chest ache and your mind race all at once. I lay in bed, the candlelight from earlier still lingering faintly in the corner, when I heard it. A soft creak, like someone walking across the old wooden floor. My eyes shot open. For a moment, I told myself it was just the house settling. But the sound came again, slower this time, deliberate. I held my breath. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the pipes. It was footsteps. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet brushing the cold floor. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to hide, to pretend I wasn't here. But something stronger pulled me forward, curiosity, or maybe courage, or maybe just the need to finally face whatever had haunted me for decades. I moved toward the hallway. The floorboards groaned under my weight. I could feel my heart hammering, every beat loud enough to echo in my ear. And then I saw it. A shadow moved at the end of the corridor. I froze. The shadow paused. And then, I saw the shape of him. Robert, not older, not sick, not frail. He looked exactly like I remembered, alive, real, standing there with the same quiet strength that had always made me feel safe. I blinked, thinking I must be dreaming. But the moment stretched out, and he didn't vanish. He stepped forward. "I never left," he said, his voice soft but certain. It wasn't a ghostly echo. It wasn't my imagination. It was him. Tears sprang to my eyes, and I ran toward him. We embraced in the middle of that old hallway, the kind of hug that held every apology, every regret, every moment we had missed. I felt the warmth of him against me, and I realized this was the peace I had been chasing all these years. We sat together in the living room, talking quietly. He told me about the things he had hidden, the mistakes, the fear of facing me, the years lost in silence. I told him about the nights I cried alone, about the anger, the betrayal, and then the eventual forgiveness that had made me human again. By the time dawn crept into the windows, we were still talking. The house seemed to breathe around us, as if it too had been waiting for this reunion. And then I realized something. This wasn't just a second chance at love. It was a second chance at life, at understanding, at healing, at finally letting the past rest. He held my hands in his. I looked into his eyes and saw every moment we had lost, every pain, every joy. And I smiled, because for the first time, the future didn't scare me. It felt possible. That morning I made tea. We sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the quiet streets. The world was the same, yet everything had changed. I didn't need to chase answers anymore. They had found me, and I realized something deeper than any secret, any betrayal, any heartbreak. Life is fragile. Love is fragile. But forgiveness is unstoppable. I didn't know what the next chapter held, but I knew one thing for certain: we had each other. And that was enough. I still remember the morning after it all happened, the way the sunlight poured through the curtains, painting golden lines across the floor. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every small detail, every imperfection, every breath. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the room that had held so many memories, some joyful, some painful, some that I had tried to erase from my mind but could never forget. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dust, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped by it. I got up slowly, each step deliberate, each movement heavy with the awareness of everything that had led to this moment. I thought about the past, the fights, the betrayals, the moments when I had felt completely alone in the world, and I realized that despite it all, I was still breathing. And more than that, I was ready to live again. The house was still, but I could hear the faint hum of life outside, a dog barking, the distant sound of a car passing, leaves rustling in the wind. It was ordinary, but ordinary felt miraculous after everything that had happened. I walked into the kitchen, my bare feet brushing the cold floor, and made myself a cup of tea. I didn't rush. I didn't force myself to do anything. I just existed, and that felt enough. Then I heard him. "Robert," his voice, quiet but firm, coming from the other room. "Are you awake?" I smiled without turning around. "I've been awake," I said, my voice rough from sleep and emotion. He came into the kitchen, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No words were necessary. The years of fear, the years of distance, the years of silence, they were all there, hovering in the space between us, but somehow, they didn't feel heavy anymore. He placed his hand on mine, and I felt a warmth that went deeper than skin, deeper than memory. "I didn't know if you'd ever forgive me," he said softly. I shook my head, smiling through the tears that had formed in my eyes. "I don't need to forgive you. I just need to be here now. That's enough." And it was enough. The days that followed were slow, but filled with discovery. We talked about everything, about the past, about the mistakes, about the things we had left unsaid. Each conversation felt like peeling away a layer of hurt, a layer of fear, until there was nothing left but honesty and understanding. There were moments when I wanted to cry, moments when I laughed so hard I thought I might fall to the floor. There were quiet evenings when we simply sat together, holding hands, listening to the world breathe around us. I took walks again, something I hadn't done in years, without feeling the weight of anxiety pressing down on me. The neighborhood looked different somehow, not because it had changed, but because I had changed. I saw neighbors smiling, children playing, the sun glinting on the leaves, and I felt like I could finally notice it all. Life wasn't just happening around me anymore. I was a part of it. Robert and I began to make plans, small at first, simple things that felt monumental in their significance. We cooked meals together, explored the old corners of the town we had forgotten, and even laughed about the ridiculous arguments we had once had. Each moment was precious because it was ours, reclaimed from the years of fear and distance. One evening, I found myself in the living room, looking at old photographs we had both kept hidden. There we were as children, as teenagers, as young adults, moments frozen in time. And I realized that every single photograph, every single memory, had led us to this exact moment. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every wrong turn had brought us back to each other. It wasn't just love that had survived. It was resilience. It was forgiveness. It was the courage to keep moving, even when the world seemed determined to break us. I understood then that life isn't about never being hurt or never being betrayed. It's about standing back up, over and over, and finding the people and the moments that make it all worth it. We spent the next few weeks restoring the house together, not because it needed it, but because we wanted to create a space that reflected the peace we had finally found. We repainted walls, repaired floors, dusted off old furniture, and slowly, the house became more than a building. It became a home, a sanctuary, a place where we could finally breathe without fear, without tension, without the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. And then came the day I had been waiting for without even realizing. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. Robert reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine as naturally as if they had never been apart. "I missed this," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, tears running down my cheeks. "I know, I missed you too, every single day." We sat there for a long time, just watching the world change color, feeling the breeze, listening to the quiet. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Happiness isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't always come with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes happiness is quiet. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's just sitting next to the person you love, knowing that no matter what has happened, you've made it. The night came, and with it, a deep sense of calm that I hadn't felt in decades. I looked at Robert and smiled. "Thank you for coming back," I said again, because I would never get tired of saying it. He smiled, that quiet, knowing smile. "I never left," he replied. And in that truth, I found the final piece of peace I had been searching for all my life. As the stars blinked to life in the sky above, I knew that the future, with all its uncertainties and surprises, was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. We had each other. We had the chance to live fully, to love fully, to forgive fully. And that was enough. So if you've ever felt lost, betrayed, abandoned, or broken, remember this. It's never too late to find your way back to yourself, to find the people who truly matter, and to reclaim your life. Hold on to love, hold on to forgiveness, and don't be afraid to start again. And if you've followed this journey with me, if you've felt even a fraction of the fear, the pain, and the joy I've shared, then I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for being. And before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button on our channel because there are so many more stories waiting. Stories that will make you laugh, cry, and reflect on life in ways you never imagined. Don't miss a single one. Life is fragile. Love is fragile. But hope is unstoppable.